Welcome back, everybody. This is the Workforce on Deck podcast. I am one of your co hosts, Dr. Sarah Inman. And as Michael Scott says, the turntables have turned a little bit today because usually my esteemed co host, Vince Jackson, is the one in the driver's seat asking the pointed questions. But Vince is actually the one that is being interviewed today. So, Vince, say hello to the people.
Good morning. It's great to be here, and I'm hoping it sticks to just questions and not an inquisition. Let's just put that out front, right? So, we'll see how this goes. So,
I need to practice my Inquisition skills, so we are going to see how it goes. But don't you worry, I have a whole list here that I want to talk to you about. But one of the reasons we're doing this today, and before we jump into the questions, wanted to tee this up a little bit and Vince, hear from you. We've got a really cool new series that you have just started working on, and we're going to start publishing that really soon, giving the people the information. But I would love it if you would tell us a little bit about your It Matters series, what this is going to look like, and really what your thought process was behind it. So let's start there. What is the It Matters series?
well, it's a conglomeration of really old thoughts with fresh ideas people onto it, and to some degree, right? Obviously, I've been in this industry for quite a while when it comes to workforce management. Well over 20 years now. And I've seen a lot of things. I've seen a lot of things that scratch my head. I've seen a lot of things that just go, wow, that's awesome. That's incredible. More than anything, I've seen how the tools and the processes have improved dramatically. But the strangest thing, Sarah, is at the end of the day, no matter how good a tool is or how great the technology is, it tends to always come back to core elementary things that matter and make the impact to how successful you are as an organization. So, that's what I really wanted to kind of focus on and kind of circle back to is, granted, you got the best tool. Granted, you've got some great people, but are you doing the right things to get the maximum out of your solutions and your processes to best benefit your organization and your people? So, I kind of can't, as I was thinking about that, I'm like, hey, what are the things that impact, right? And so I went through that and I created a list of the key topics, the key areas, and honestly, it was about 20 something, things long. I'm like, okay, I can't do that. I mean, we'd still be here 2 years from now doing this. So I like, okay, what are the ones that have the biggest impact? Did a little research on that on myself. I went back and looked at a lot of old assessments I'd done and kind of harshed through that, used my friend AI to actually do a little analysis on those to say, when I look at these things, what were the things I consistently had to point out to organizations that they needed to change or that we were changing, right, in our own organizations? And, kind of came up with this list of topics that I want to hit on. We're down to 10. Also brought in some new fresh stuff. One of the stuff we're going to hit a little later is, how to leverage AI best, which is a massive evolution, right? And we talked about this with healthcare and everything else, right? It's incredibly sensitive, but man, they got to figure out how to how to take advantage of it, but not put things at jeopardy. So I think that, these topics I think are core to what it matters. And, I start with, as well, my first publication that I'm putting out or blog or whatever we want to call it, right? That's going to have a little bit of LinkedIn, campaign with it too, is around business strategy. And I think core that in some ways is actually the driver for the next 9 articles, right? You got to get that business strategy up front first. And to me, that's what, when I walked in organizations and saw the ones who were successful and the ones who weren't successful or were struggling, that was the first thing I noticed. Do they have an overriding strategy of what they actually want to do when it comes to their, HRS and workforce management applications? So that was a long-winded way to kind of share where it came from, but it's a combination of things that have happened and I've seen and experienced over the last 20 years. That's the short answer.
So you mentioned 10 topics, and obviously we're, talking here today about the series. We're going to spend some time talking about why workforce management strategy is a business strategy. So as you mentioned, the first article that you published, the first topic really is the setting the foundation. But what can we expect from this series? So obviously, you mentioned the articles, so sounds like we're doing some podcast component with this as well. But what can the people
Yep.
expect from this? The How often do you intend to publish? When should they be listening out for new episodes? Checking out your LinkedIn. What's the best mechanism for people to get all of this information that we're going to be talking about?
Lots of different ways. I mean, we're expecting to try to publish these every, 3 to 4 weeks, maybe even a little bit faster if we can get around to it. The massive part of the campaign is actually gonna be starting here, well, actually with the launch of this and a publication here probably the next few weeks, so that would be late July, early August. The intent is to get them all published through the fall season, so before we get into winter and you start looking and planning for next year, the calendar year, we wanna have them all out there. So, what we'll be publishing is the podcast. We'll try to do those every 3 or 4 weeks. I suspect the podcast may lag the publications a little bit, just knowing how our marketing team works. But we're gonna put the full blog out on our website. So stay connected to it. Make sure you're following it. But the easiest way to stay connected is follow you or me or our podcast on LinkedIn, right? Because we're going to be posting the articles, we're going to be posting the links to it, we're going to be posting our podcast, and the articles themselves aren't going to be dramatic, but they're really going to start with a story. From a real life experience. I'm going to walk through and talk about that a little bit. And then I'm going to talk about, what we uncover, what the resolution was. And then we're going to kind of dive into how it applies across pretty much any business, any vertical, any line of business. Now, a lot of the stories I'll talk about come from my experience, which is primarily retail, but nothing I'm talking about is specific to retail. And what I mean by that is it applies anywhere, right? And, that's where I want to kind of jump into, especially on this podcast. And with you, right, is we can dive into, hey, here's what it meant to retail. Here's what it meant to public sector. Here's what it meant to, so forth. But we can really harp in on healthcare, where like this first one had probably the biggest impact of anybody was on healthcare. But so, want to make sure that everybody understands, regardless of what line of business you're coming from, you can get something out of this, and you should get something out of this, and you'll walk away with some key points and some key elements that you want to take away. Go, how can I apply this in my organization? What can I do to activate it? So,
And
and which, by the way, we're always here helping you to do that too.
yeah, by the way, yes. So you mentioned following the website. So www.improvisations.com for those of you who don't have that bookmarked and are regularly checking it every single day for new content from us. But also, as you said, following us on LinkedIn. So that's going to be where you're sharing the insights. The blog posts are going to go live so people can follow along. And what I'm looking forward to most from this is the stories. And you alluded to that a little bit in your response to the last question of these are the stories throughout your career. These are the things that you've encountered. These are the experiences you've had with your own customers or just you from being boots on the ground from years in consulting and workforce management. So is that something that everybody should expect? It very much more a storytelling modality here than us just throwing a bunch of facts and data at the wall.
Absolutely. Especially on my podcast or in the actual blog, right? I expect it to be a little more of a story, with a little more content. I think we can, as we get through the podcast, hopefully, I'm happy to regurgitate that story, but at the same time, I think we talk, a little more broadly and get into more of how this does affect business and what are some other examples of where we see it impact things and what are the more benefits, right? Expand on that concept. The blog should be kind of the starting point. And ideally, you've read that before you come to the podcast and you go, okay, yeah, I get the basics. I understand what they're trying to do. Now let's dive into that more. The other thing I'll encourage, assuming that we can get the cast going just after or around the same time, if you get hold of the blog before and you haven't seen the podcast come out, let us know if you got questions. We'll be happy to try to adjust those questions before we get to it. Now, it's going to be tight, but do it. Or even after, if there's questions that you have, you're like, well, what about this or that? Or how can that influence this? You know, don't hesitate to throw it at us. I love these topics. You do too. I know it. We love just kind of sharing ideas and kind of letting those things, build themselves in conversation. So happy to do that as well. So
Love it. So one more question for you before we kind of dive into the content. What would you say was most surprising to you going through this exercise? Because from the perspective of somebody who's watched it on the back end, this is a lift. It's a significant amount of, content that you've put together, thought that's gone into it, really kind of going back through decades of your career. So, what was the most surprising part to you as you were kind of going through this exercise?
I don't know if this is good or bad, but the first thought that went through my mind is, "Holy crap, I've seen a lot." It's like, "Okay, yeah." A lot has happened in the 20 years I've been involved in this industry, and obviously that's not my entire career, but, since I've been, knee deep or, probably treading water in workforce management for so long, it's amazing how much has changed from how you hire to how you develop to, what you expect of people, what people expect of you as a business. I mean, it is not the same as it was 5 years ago, much less 20 years ago, and it's not gonna be the same tomorrow. So, that was what, you kind of I sat back and reflect on like, man, a lot has changed and I've seen a lot of change and I'm going to see a lot of change. That also drove my decision on some of the topics I want to talk about because I think, from my perspective, every single one of these topics we're going to hit on will continue to live.
Hmm.
These are not like time stamped of you need to do this today or it's going to pass you by. This is things that you need to be thinking about as you continue forward. And yes, they'll change and they'll develop and they'll, mold as, as the environment changes, the workforce changes and as technology changes, as AI, does its thing and or we take it and let it do its thing. But these are things that you can have core to how you manage going forward and work and operate going forward. So
Cool.
that was it to me. It was, hey, these are some core principles. So
Yeah. I'm excited. And without further ado, let's just kind of dive right into it. And the very first It Matters podcast series, first of many, certainly. But as I mentioned at the start, our really core foundational topic here and where you built everything else from is why workforce strategy is business strategy. And not going too much into it, because again, our assumption is people have come to the podcast having read the blog, but because we have some pretty loyal podcast listeners who may not have seen it, just kind of setting the stage a little bit from where your blog post kind of kicks us off is you were heading to a team event in Nashville. You're on the flight home. You're landing in a world that's literally about to change because, spoiler alert, it's March of 2020. So we all kind of know what happened from there. When the world changed overnight and, we all just woke up one day and we're in the midst of a new COVID landscape, what separated those organizations that adapted from the ones that didn't? Talk to us a little bit about that and the inspiration behind this.
what separated those from who didn't that survived and didn't survive or even struggled, right? I would say it is the strategy. It's the strategy on how they're going to handle their people, how they're going to communicate to their people, how they would engage their people to, you know, and even from a technology standpoint, how ready were they for turning the tables, taking a different route, and being agile, right? And understanding that the business model was already changing in a lot of ways. And some of those who were being, you know, preemptive on getting technology in place and thinking about where the world's going and where they should be using their workforce and processes and tools and everything else were able to adapt very quickly. Those who were mired in this is the way things have been done and always been done, and I don't want to change it, and I'm not open to looking at other opportunities, or I don't know how to, were the ones that failed. I mean, there's a lot more to it than that, but that's it in a nutshell. I mean, if we talk about some great examples and for those who or, aren't as up to it that maybe are quite a bit younger than us and, newer to, okay, what happened in 2020? I know there's this COVID thing and all that kind of stuff, right? It's kind of sad to say that, but we're 6 years past it now. And some of these people were in middle school, high school, possibly listening to us now.
Yeah, very much
Hopefully the young
so.
people are. The world stopped. I mean, it legitimately stopped. And, I think in some ways where I was working, we felt it probably a little bit less because I had a very dispersed organization working across the, US and out of their home already. So we didn't feel quite the same impact, but we felt it in a different way. we adapted really quickly, right? We went to do, we already had tools in place to do things online. We were used to working remotely. We were able to adapt quickly. We were able to figure out, okay, how do we still communicate with each other, with our leadership, with our clients, with our product teams, all that kind of stuff. For those, let's talk a little bit about retail, right? Retail. I mean, think about it. In a matter of days, you went from the customer showing up at your door at 9 or 10 in the morning when you open and being busy till you shut the doors to they couldn't leave their house. It started off, I think, like 6 weeks, and then it went to longer, then it went to longer, then it went to a mask, and then by that time, people weren't getting to it. It was the biggest boom Amazon ever heard. That's probably what built them. But the reality is, taking that aside, is it changed overnight. And by the way, it's never gone back and it never will go back to where it was. Malls were already dead, most of them. That was the nail in the coffin.
Oh,
Those who are still in malls are struggling, the few there are. The way people shop, the way people buy, everything changed. And for those retailers who were technologically savvy and had the processes they can put in place quickly to buy online and pick up either in store or in the parking lot there to start with only, were quick to survive. Not only did they survive, they thrived because there were some of the few places that could actually do it. Restaurants did it the fastest. They figured out how to do it, right? They've always been a little more probably edgy on the technology, right? Because they've always been trying to streamline things to be quicker, faster, and quick, especially quick serve. But you saw them flip immediately. And, they figured out how to staff differently. They figured out that, yeah, you don't need as many people at the front line, even though some of them were, taking the phone calls and doing it that way before they had the online, the app or anything else to do it. They were figuring out how to quickly get orders, get out there, get it done. Same with retail, same with some of the organizations. I would say, those are the ones who were able to adapt because they were thinking about it differently. It's how do I let my workforce work for me instead of me dictating how it has to work. That makes sense. It's yeah.
it does. And, when we talk about that, COVID was an unprecedented event, right? No one could have envisioned it happening. Nobody could have, had a crystal ball to see how it went down. And to your point, some organizations, businesses took that opportunity and ran with it and thrived, and then others died. So, from your perspective, where do you think that differentiator is, or why some were able to excel in the midst of that? Is it that they just had, the mindset of, I need to be able to pivot quickly. I can't be locked into this is how we've always done it, so nothing else is going to work? Or do you think it was more a combination of things and having, kind of access to different technology? What would your perspective be on that?
You hit the nail on the head, mindset, which, kind of goes with our other podcast, leadership mindset. That is where it is. It's not that in a lot of cases, some had the advantage that they had the technology and things in place. We're already thinking about it in the future. But even that came out of the mindset they had. They were looking for opportunity to how they can change and take advantage of the situation they have to make it create positive output and outcomes versus how do I guard myself? How do I, some retailers went, oh my God, I got to cut labor, started firing people, started cutting hours, started doing all these things, and but did nothing to try to actually save, create business
Mhm.
or, tend to continue to have business. They went the guarded route, which is, in that terms is the way you always did it. I'm sure, retail is not the only one. You manufacture because their production had to go down, right? Governments basically shut down. And, while some jobs were protected, some jobs were furloughed, some jobs, they went into protective mode of, well, let me salvage what I can versus, okay, how can I look at this from an advantageous standpoint to differentiate myself, tap into that customer base is still out there because the demand is still there. And I don't care if you're talking hospitals with sick people or you're talking people wanting fast food, the demand was still there. So how do I take advantage of getting people in the right place, the tools in the right, processes in place to serve those customers, create actual fans? I mean, there's one big company that I deal with when I do any work on my home that totally overhauled how you go, buy from this big box store. I mean, they have the best app out there still to this day. If I want to buy something and have it ready for me or have it delivered or pick it up in a parking spot number 4, I don't care. It is the best easy way to buy, and it came out of this. They flipped immediately to how do I serve my customer and continue to create business. You see it, saw it time after time. So yes, it's mindset and having that positive mindset of what do I do to make this most advantageous as I can. So
You said something at the beginning that really resonated, and I think is so true that when things changed after COVID, even though now it's been 6 years and that seems hard to believe, it feels in many ways like it's yesterday, that was a permanent disruption to industry. So our new way of doing things, and we see this every day in the work that we do. When we were in consulting pre-COVID, I traveled 3 or 4 weeks out of the month. Everything was done on site. That was just the way of doing things. And then when we had to do this during COVID, both consulting firms and, other organizations as well as customers thought, wait, you know what? This can be done virtually, or there is a different way of doing it. But the disruption to this is how we've always done it was permanent. So none of us, I think, in any industry have ever been able to go back to the pre-COVID days and probably never will. So when we're thinking about business strategy, when you're thinking about these other organizations, what else are we seeing right now that may not be a COVID, related thing, but is also going to be a disruptor that people need to be able to continue to think about and really pivot through in order to be successful?
there's a couple, but let me hit this one first because I think this impacts every line of business. And it's actually impacted me from a healthcare perspective. I went to probably, you had to go book an appointment 6 months out to go see your doctor. And, God forbid you had to have a procedure or something to do in a hospital. You're booking that months out and then timely. And it was just very rigid on how you did things.
Mhm.
To now, I don't feel good. 5 minutes later, I can be on a doctor's appointment virtually.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hmm.
I'm having an issue that I need to get taken care of quickly. I've seen the evolution, and we have one being built here locally, which is just basically a surgical center. Now I know they existed before COVID, but there's more and more. And there's like one-off emergency rooms that they're building now, which is a completely different concept. And a lot of it's because of that, right? Because they had to figure out different ways to address the demands of their clients or their patients or whatever, they're called in your industry. And those who have figured out how to do that, right, it's creating convenience and it creates the least resistance for getting your potential client or customer, whoever you want to call them, to your door and taken care of, or not necessarily, really to your door or virtually or whatever the case may be, but making it easy for those around you and those you're trying to serve. I think that is what people came out of this with. I mean, if you think about it, I never bought online hardly before COVID. Now 90% of my purchases are online.
Yeah.
And it's like, but it's convenient. That's
Hmm.
why I do it. And if I don't like it, you know what? I drop it off at the UPS store and it goes right back.
Yep.
And it's back on my credit card or a credit, within a day or two. I don't have to go to the store. I don't have to, deal with everything that happens there. It's just convenient. So to me, those are some of the things that have come out of it that will never ever change. And God knows how this is going to accelerate with the technology and where it's going right now and AI and everything else. I mean, we're going to
Thought
wake
you
up.
were gonna say AI. I'm shocked that you had the example that you shared because in my mind I was like, oh, he's gonna talk about AI here. But
Yeah,
I mean, honestly, it's true. Your example being a prime example of here's something that completely disrupted an industry that didn't go back to the old way, but also to your point, the organizations that have not gotten on board with that, if I want something and I realize I can't get it online, a lot of times I'll go to a different retailer. Like, I'm not willing to then go, all right, fine, I guess I'll get in my car and drive 45 minutes to this store. No, I'm going to go somewhere where I can get it instead. So, very much again, the reason AI was in my head is the way that that has disrupted the industry. It feels like AI is also changing things in a way that we're not going to go back to the old way of doing it. So, figuring out how to pivot and get on board with that from a business strategy perspective almost feels like a necessity at this point.
It does, and this it permeates every single industry. I'll say that over and over, right? I know I keep harping a little bit on retail, but you think about healthcare and how far it's come and how much more convenient it is. Like all my prescriptions are online that I do now. Boom, easy. They show up at the door. Booking appointments is all online. Something happens, we have to reschedule one. I had it happen this week and all or last week, and now easy, quickly, easy, able to change it and adapt to it. Whereas it used to be try 20 times to call your doctor until they happen not to be on a call with somebody else and you get through to them and actually then spend 20 minutes trying to figure out when you can actually get in.
Mhm,
It's just, it's the world has changed in where I even see it. And I know we're not talking AI yet, but if you're not adapting and thinking about how do you evolve, you're really gonna be in trouble because pretty soon you're just gonna talk to your computer or to your phone and say, "Hey, I'm looking for this," and it's gonna throw up 3 options, say, "Yeah, I want that one." Boom, it's gonna do the order, and next thing you know, it's gonna be on your front porch.
mhm,
You're gonna say, "I need to go see a doctor about this." It's gonna look and see what doctors you're affiliated with and schedule an appointment for you. I mean, that's where it's going. It's gonna be so instantaneous, and we're gonna be so spoiled. I wanna pause here for a second, though, and give kudos to those who have figured out how to adapt, but in a different way.
mhm.
Okay. So there are certain brands that you are willing to go to their store.
Yes.
There are certain things you are willing to get out and go do because they've been able to say, okay, you know what? This is what I want to be. I
Mhm,
know who I want to be, but here's what I'm going to have to do to be that. They still changed. They adapted their image, they adapted how they market, they adapted even their pricing structure, they adapted a lot of things, but they created a different type of demand that was unique.
mhm.
Those who just tried to ride the old wave aren't, right?
Yeah.
That's why so many of them have disappeared, things that, groups that we grew up with, so,
Yeah.
or organizations. So,
I think that's so resonant because you're absolutely right. There are spot on. There are things that no matter what, I'm gonna get in the car and I'm gonna make the drive. I'm gonna do this thing because of this particular brand or this activity or this, whatever that, yes, I may be able to do something online, but then that's not part of the experience, and the brand identity as part of business strategy, I think is so important because there are, companies and there are brands that probably could or conventionally should have gone under during COVID that survived because they found a way to adapt during the time that it was necessary, but also they know what works for them and have continued to lean into that. So knowing who you are as a company and knowing what your values are and what's important to you, I think is also really critical there. And that takes me to you personally a little bit, that I want to shift this a bit because you and I have built a brand identity over the last 2 years at Improv. And with you wearing a COO hat and all of the other hats you wear. This is a conversation Vince and I have, behind the scenes all the time of, how many jobs he's actually doing in addition to his day job. But in addition to wearing all of those hats, you had to build an identity for the Improv brand. You had to build a culture that would keep people moving through the massive pace of change that we've experienced over the last 2 years as we've continued to build out the company. So talk about that a little bit from your vantage point of literally having lived this as the COO of Improv over the last year and a half, 2 years.
oh, it's been 2 years, huh?
It is all yeah.
Okay.
Can you believe it?
You blink and there it goes. But
Yeah.
to me, it's first being founded in what it is that you want to be in combination with the clientele you want to work with and what they need, along with the people you want to surround yourself with. Okay. So, it was a little bit of it was a piecemeal story. You were along for most of the ride and you were an integral part of the massive lift part of creating what we've created. It started with, luckily you joining in our organization. And then we slowly continued to pull in different people. Did we pull in some people that didn't work out? Of course we did. But we knew the culture, what we wanted to do. We want to be a premier consultancy company that helps organizations be successful in their desired business outcomes. We want to help them understand what the outcomes are that they're trying to actually achieve if they're not clearly defined, and we want to help make sure that the processes are in place, especially from a workforce management HCM perspective, to get and deliver on those outcomes, which is more than I want to turn a wrench. I could do that all day long. I don't care to.
Mhm,
I'm about developing organizations and helping organizations be successful. By the way, that's the same thing that I feel, and I know you feel, and most of our organization feels about each other.
mhm,
We want each other to be successful. So it's not that we just want that for our customer and our clients. We want that for our people. We want that for our processes. We want that for how we deliver to be cleaner, faster. I want to live what we preach as well,
mhm,
meaning that if we're going to talk about how did they continue to evolve and change, we better be evolving and changing too. We got to have our pulse on what's going on out there in the industry and how do we help organizations, take advantage of it to deliver what it is they're trying to do. So to me, it's always been I've had that as the vision. And it does come from my own experiences, from your experiences, the experience of other people in our organization that we just kind of brought together. And by the way, it is evolving, right? We're going to change the way some of our service operations are working right now, and where we even have, kind of, hey, here's where it was when we started this. 7 months later, well, it's actually kind of evolved into this. So guess what? We're going to put it under this bucket now because
mhm.
that's where it's being beneficial and where the clients are getting the best out of it. So we're every day, and to me, that's the most fulfilling part of it. Yes, we want to be successful, but I think the fastest way to success is to have our people be successful and have our clients be successful. And, that makes our success a lot easier. I won't say easy, it's easier, right? Because every day we got to do it. So, I mean, I'll flip it on you. I mean, you've been along for the ride. You've seen what we've had to do and, and seen some of the challenges we have to get through and get people to understand who we're about. And, what's your thoughts on that? How do you
I very much agree that, deciding who we were and wanted to be up front and being ruthless about defending that and maintaining that was critical. And when I say that, I mean, you mentioned our aim and goal is to be a consultancy company that helps organizations be successful with their business outcomes. And that is the key piece that I feel like we decided on very, very early that it was not, we're not willing to just be the fastest and cheapest and, jack of all trades. There is a very important core of what we believe is critical to an organization's success. And understanding those business outcomes, understanding the strategy around it, building out that journey map has been since day one, the conversations that we've been having. And it would have been much easier to pivot at certain points and not hold to that. There are organizations who don't want to do that. They again want the fastest, the cheapest. And being able to say, okay, then we're not the firm for you because this is what we do and this is who we are and this is who our people are, I think at the end of the day has attributed to our success because that was never negotiable for us. There are other things we needed to pivot on, there are things we needed to shift, but the core outcome of who we wanted to be as a business has always remained true, regardless of what wave we happen to have been riding over, the last year and a half. So I feel like that brand identity piece is so critical to the business strategy because without it, you're sort of rudderless and don't know what your North Star is at the end of the day.
And there's a lot of organizations out there that fit right in that boat that you just described, don't have a rudder
Mhm.
and are just bouncing up and down on the waves, never knowing which one's going to sink them. And, one other thing that you kind of reminded me of is we gave ourselves permission to fire customers,
Yes.
clients.
Hmm.
And there's only been a couple, right? But I mean, I think any organization should reserve that right. And what I mean by that, too, by the way, I don't mean I want to just wake up one day and say, well, yeah, I don't want to deal with this person anymore. It's that some organizations don't fit what you're about.
Hmm.
We're here to be successful and help people deliver their outcomes and help their business and organizational be successful. We're not here just to be the cheapest wrench turner. And sometimes you come across a client and that's what they're looking for.
Hmm.
And that's not what we are. We're going to give you guidance. And if we see that, hey, we're not going to be successful in helping you deliver what it is that you've said you want to deliver, and we got to have a hard conversation. Now, we've had those hard conversations with clients, and I have historically throughout my career had those hard conversations. 99% of the time, they respect it and they go, okay, you're right. Right. Let's figure out how to do this. I lost focus of the outcome of what I'm trying to get to. There's always these pressures to get live or get things done or deliver or hit certain dates. And you got to decide, is it worth sacrificing what you're trying to get to hit something that may be much more trivial than the actual outcome you're trying to get to? But hey, at any organization, you should reserve the right to potentially fire your customer, with the exception of I can't say healthcare should ever fire their people, their clients, right? You got to take care of people, and there's some other organizations like that too, public sector and things like that. But you get what I'm saying is that you need to know who it is that you're trying to deliver to and who you're trying to focus on. And if you know your client base well and the client base that you're wanting to serve, you should be able to manage through that. So yeah.
Agree. So as we're kind of coming up to the end here, this is again the types of things that we want the readers of the blogs and the listeners of the podcast to be thinking about, of these things where, you know, this is your workforce management strategy is your competitive advantage, your brand identity, the ability to pivot when you have unprecedented challenges that drop in your lap, like a global pandemic, for instance, or the resurgence or, of AI and what that means. So what would be kind of as the closing question here, talking to other COOs, leaders, executives that are out there in the industry, what is the thing that they should be thinking about the most if they listened to this episode and thought, "Oh, I don't know that we have that." And that being the core identity or idea of where the business is heading so that they could truly leverage that as a business strategy. What should they be thinking about? What should their next step be if they feel like that's a gap for them today?
Besides, call us
Besides call
and
up,
help you.
which that's step
Yeah,
that's 0.
yeah, that's zero. But I mean, seriously, it should be self reflection, right? Do you know who your client base is? Do you know who you want your client base to be? What do you want to be as an organization? And honestly, that goes back to how do you treat your people? Do you have the same respect and same strategy with the people that you're hiring and developing and investing in that you have with how you want your organization to run with its desired client base, right? I mean, all right, to make sense of this, we're focusing a lot on healthcare. We deal with any industry. We're focusing a lot on healthcare. Who are we hiring? People that come from healthcare, that have healthcare experience, that can go into a conversation in a hospital and know what the heck they're talking about,
Right.
to understand the pain points, to be able to say, okay, here's what I've seen be successful, understanding where you're trying to go and what you're trying to do to give good guidance. If you're trying to build an organization that wants to deliver X, Y, and Z, and you're hiring people that deliver ABC, guess what? Your people strategy is off.
Mhm.
Or you need to go back to the drawing board and figure out who do you actually want to be as an organization. So to me, it's making sure that your people strategy aligns to your overall business strategy or what you're trying to do. And that takes some hard self-reflection of saying, am I investing in the right people or am I just hiring to fill holes?
Mhm.
And, that will always get you in trouble in the long run.
Yep.
So,
Unfortunately, we know that to be true.
yeah.
So, round this off, tell us a little bit about what to expect for future topics, things you kind of got up your sleeve for the rest of the It Matters series.
I'll get sort of, I'll hit just a couple. So AI, obviously, I'm going to talk about that. That's a little further on. I'm going to leave that one hanging out there for you for a while. Coming up pretty soon, we're going to talk about skills and making sure this ties to that people strategy, making sure you have people with the right skills and knowing what their skills are, making sure you're leveraging those skills. The other one is managers. And when I say managers, it could be of any level, but more specifically people managers and understanding what is it you expect from them, they should be doing. How do you tie that to, again, your business strategy? So, those are a few teasers out there, right? There's quite a few other topics. We're actually going to post all 10 topics on the landing page on our improvisations.com, and you'll be able to see roughly what order they're going to be in, and you'll see the ones that are posted, and we'll update it as each one's post. But there's this 10 good topics. We've got 3 or 4 ready to go. We're just cleaning them up a little bit from you know what is it you guys call me? You call me verbose when it comes to writing time. So we're trying to streamline them a little bit, get them in checked a little bit. Otherwise, my story goes on and on. Yeah, those are some of the good ones we got coming up. And please come back and check out our podcasts around these topics too. And Sarah, thank you for diving into this too. I really enjoy this, and hopefully everyone walks away with something that they can go apply.
I have no doubt they will. Again, as I mentioned at the start, what I'm most looking forward to here are just the stories and, talking through those different experiences. So, as Vince mentioned, if you're reading the podcast articles or or reading the blog posts and listening to the podcast, reach out if you've got questions. Even if it's not something that we necessarily can get in the next episode, we'll address it in future episodes. And then also what I've been scoping out is possible guest appearances for some of these
Mhm.
podcasts as well, because as I look at the writing you've done and the work you've done, there's a lot of really cool people that we've encountered over our careers, but then also just that we have the opportunity to work with every day, who I think their experiences are really going to lend a lot to the conversation as well. So by all means, stay tuned for who may be coming up next on the pod. But with that, Vince, thank you, of course, for your time. I love turning the tables and being the one that's able to put you in the hot seat and ask all the questions. But otherwise, everyone, thanks for joining us today. Can't wait to talk to you next time. And be sure to share this episode with a friend if it resonated with you.
Thanks all.